The 4th of July, Saturday morning, 2026, Common Era, 2569, Buddhist Era. A reading from the Common Buddhist Text, Guidance and Insight from the Buddha. We're currently in Chapter 9, on wisdom from the perspective of the Vajrayana tradition. We left off on insight into the lack of identity. In the greater and the lesser vehicle, it is said that one needs to realize the twofold lack of identity, or lack of self-essence, of both persons and the other phenomenon. They cannot be found as unitarily independent entities. It is said that our ordinary sense of having a self is merely an imputation upon and a misinterpretation of the impermanent flux of the 5 categories of existence: physical form, rupa, feeling, vedana, and so forth. Thus, one needs to realize that a person lacks a fixed and a finable identity. In addition, it is said that one also needs to realize that the impermanent flux of the phenomenon of the 5 category existence also lacks such identity. If one analyzes these phenomena, they also cannot be found as unitarily unattainable entities with their own identity. Thus, it is said that both persons and the phenomenon of the 5 categories lacks identification. Concentration on the lack of personal identity or self-essence. The next 2 passages introduce concentration meditation on the lacks of identification, are extracted from the 17th chapter of the Jewel Ornamentation of Liberation, which deals with the perfection of wisdom, Panya. The first passage refutes the idea of a permanent personal identity, the Atta, or the Brahman, the Atman, which is the cause for every mental defilement, kilesas. The argument deploys in the passage derived from the words of Nagarjuna, the founder of the philosophical school. Everything or apprehension of a thing is included in 2 identities, and both of those identities are empty of an inherent existence. So what are these 2 identities? They are personal identity and phenomenal identity. And what is personal identity? It can be defined in several ways, but actually, a person is a continuum of the grasped categories of existence having awareness. The Fragment Sutra says this continuum is called a person. To apprehend this person as something permanent and unitarity, which it is not, and then to identify with it and cling to it. This is what is called of having an idea of a personal identity. The idea of this false identity then gives rise to mental defilements, kilesas. Kilesas, or defilement, in turn engenders action, and action brings about suffering. Thus, all suffering and every trouble is rooted in that false sense of identity or identifying with it. That is also what the commentary says. Once there is oneself, there are also others. Then, based on likes liking oneself and disliking other, one gets involved in relationships, which ends up causing a lot of trouble. Now, what is the phenomenal identity? A phenomenon is either an external, apprehended object or an internal, apprehending mind. Why are they called phenomenon or dharmas? Because they hold their own characteristics. The Fragment Sutra also says that which holds its own characteristic is called a phenomenon. Thus, to apprehend both object and subject as something and cling to them, this is called the idea of having the identity with phenomenal identity. Now, in order to explain why both identities are empty of inherent existence, first I shall refute the inherent existence of a personal identity, as Master Nagarjuna says in his Precious Garland. To say that I and mine exists is ultimately wrong. This means that such a personal identity is ultimately not attested. If such an identity as the I were ultimately attested to exist truly, then it should also exist at the time of seeing the truth. Since, however, there is no such identity at the time of seeing the truth, it is not attested. The Precious Garland also says, because as one fully understands things the way they are, neither of them arise. To understand things as the way they are means to see the truth. Neither of them arise. Means that no apprehension of I or mine arises. Furthermore, if such an identity exists, then it should be produced either from itself or something else, or both, or from anything in the three times. Let's investigate this. It cannot be produced from itself, because either it already exists or it does not. If it does not already exist, then it cannot be a cause. If it does not already exist, then it cannot be its own results. Thus, there is a contradiction in the identity producing itself. It also cannot be produced from something else because it cannot become a cause. How is that? A cause depends on a result. As long as there is no result, there cannot be a cause. When there is no cause, then the results can be produced, just as seen before. It also cannot be produced from both itself and something else, because both positions are problematic, as we have shown. It also cannot arise from anything in the three times. It cannot arise from the past, because the past is like a rotten seed. Its potency exhausted, expired. It cannot arise from the future, because then it would be just as non-existent as the child of a barren woman. It also cannot arise from the present, because the assistant cause and the assisted results cannot exist together. Therefore, the Precious Garland says, since it cannot arise from itself, or from other, or from both, or form, or anything in the past, the future, and the present, grasping as at a self is ended. It also can be understood in the following way. Investigate whether your personal identity exists in your body, your personal identity exists in your mind, or in your name. This body is composed of the four great elements. The solidarity of the body is earth, its moisture is water, its heat is fire, and the breath and are the wind. Therefore, there is no personal identity among these four elements, just as there is no such identity amongst the four external elements: earth, water, air, fire, ether, and so forth. Do you think that such an identity exists in your mind? Well, the mind is nowhere to be found, since this cannot be seen by either yourself or others. If even your mind cannot be found, how could a personal identity exist in it? Do you think that your identity exists in your name? Well, your name is just as spurious destination. It cannot be substantial, and it has nothing to do with your identity. Thus, we have presented three logical arguments to show the personal identity does not exist. This can be cited from the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, page 275 to 278. Concentration meditation on emptiness, or the lack of phenomenal identity. The concentration meditation on the absence of a phenomenal identity begins with a critique of the idea that there is a material reality composed of indivisible atomic particles. This leads to the conclusion that the outside world is a mental projection, the philosophical position of the Sita Maitra mind-only school. It then moves on to the critique of the idea that the mind as a concrete, observable entity exists. The point of these arguments are to be established as the middle way, understanding the emptiness of absence of fixed and solid identities. The refutation of a phenomenal identity consists of two parts. First, showing that the external apprehended objects lack substantial or inherent existence. Second, showing the internal apprehending mind lacks such an existence. Number one, the lack of substantial existence of external apprehended objects. Some Buddhist schools exert external apprehended objects to be substantially existent. According to the Vibhaka Sikhas, there is a fundamental particle, globular and partless, which is a substance, visible objects, and so forth, or all agglomerations of such particles, or combination of such particles, amalgamations of such particles. The individual particles surround each other with intervals and presently seem to be in one piece, like a yak tail or a green metal. They do not fall apart and are held together by these actions of karma of sentient beings. According to the Sattvakitas, the particles surround each other without intervals and stick together without actually touching. Despite such assertions, there can be no such material substance, for this is a particle unitarily, or is it multiple? If it is unitarily, it can be divided into parts or not. If it can be divided into parts, then it can be segregated into six: the eastern, the western, the southern, the northern, the upper, and the lower. Which undermines the assertion that it is unitarily. If a particle cannot be divided into parts, then everything would necessarily have to be included in one single particle, which also is obviously not the case. In this regard, the 20 stanzas by Vasu Bandhu says, if a single particle could have 6 aspects, then the smallest would consist of 6 parts. If all 6 were occupying the same place, then the whole mass would collapse into just one particle. If you think that the particles are multiple, consider the following. If one single particle were found to exist, then there might be possible to prove the existence of manifold amalgamations of single particles. But since such an entity has not been found, manifold combinations of them are also impossible. The smallest fundamental particles, therefore, is not substantially existent. So external objects composed of them cannot exist either. So, if you think, what is the world which appears and is present to my senses? It is nothing but your own mind, which mistakenly appears as an outside world, since it appears like that of your own mind. It is an appearance. How do we know that this is the case? It can be known through scripture, reasoning, and simile. Number one, scripture. The garland of the Buddha Sutra says, O son of the victorious Sakaya, victorious one, the Buddha, the three realms only are mind. Also, the descent into the Lanka says, the mind stirred up by latencies appears as the world of external objects. It isn't real, though, but it is the mind itself. The external world is mistaken vision. 2, reasoning. The thesis is that the external world is the appearance of a confused mind. The reason is that whatever appears and is present to the senses lacks substantial existence, like a man's horn or a tree visualized in concentration meditation. Likewise, because things do not appear as they really are, because these appearances change through the force of conditions, because they come and go by the power of imagination, and because there are different appearances for the 6 types of beings, the external world is just an appearance of a confused mind. Third, a simile. It is like a dream, an illusion, and so forth. Thus, we have shown that the external apprehended objects are not existent. The lack of existence of the internal apprehending mind. Certain Buddhist, scholarly Buddhists, and proponents of the mind school only assert that the mind exists as something that is awareness of itself, something that illuminates itself. Despite such claims, there are 3 reasons which prove that such mind does not really exist. The first reason is, when the mind is analyzed into moments, it cannot be found to exist. The second reason is, since the mind is imperceptible, it does not actually exist. The third reason is, since there are no objects, or for it to know, no mind can exist. Momentary analysis, does this mind that is allegedly aware of itself and which is supposed to illuminate itself exist for one moment or for several moments? If it is to exist for one moment, then it does not have any past, present, or future aspect or not. If it does, then it cannot be for just one moment, but rather it to be several. That is also the Precious Garland says. Just as a moment has ended, likewise it is the beginning, the middle, and the end. In a sense, a single moment is thus analyzed into 3. The world does not exist for even one single moment. If the moment does not have any past, future, and present aspect, then it cannot exist at all. Therefore, no single moment exists. The mind cannot exist either. If you think the mind can exist for several moments, then consider this. If a single moment existed, then from the accumulation of single moments, several moments might also come into existence. But since a single moment does not exist, neither can exist several moments from the accumulation. Since there are no several moments from the mind, The mind cannot exist as a linear temporal sequence. The mind is imperceptible. Search for the so-called mind and abide outside the body, within the body, or somewhere in between. It is somewhere up or down. Investigate whether it is a shape or a color. Search until you reach conviction, and search according to the oral traditions of your teacher, shifting the order of observations and so forth. If no matter how you search for or you cannot find it, it is because there is nothing to see. It has no color, no concrete characteristics at all. It is not that you cannot find something that nevertheless exists. The seeker that is searching for itself, that is the one that does the searching. It's beyond the domain of intellect, beyond anything that can be expressed or thought of. This is why it cannot be found, however you search. As Kasayapa Request Sutra says, Kasapa, the mind cannot be found either inside or outside, or between. Kasapa, the mind cannot be analyzed, indicated that it is discovered. It is invisible, imperceptible, and nowhere to be found. Kasapa, the mind has not been seen. It is not seen. Why has it not been seen by any of the Buddhas? Also, apprehending the true Dhamma, Sutra says, so when you have fully recognized the mind is to be a hollow dummy, do not think of it essentially because it is empty of any essential core. Something that is empty of essence cannot substantially exist at all. Everything is just destination, its nature thus clearly revealed. Overcome two extremes: belief that things have substantial existence and belief that they are totally non-existent. If you can and always remain in the middle, insight into the emptiness of inherent existence of phenomenon is the path to awakening, arahatship. And thus have I taught this as well. The unwavering Dharma Sutra says all phenomenon are inherently unborn, essentially not abiding, free from all limitations of actions and deeds, beyond the domains of conceptuality and non-conceptuality. Therefore, since the mind has not been seen by anyone, it is meaningless to describe it as something that is aware of itself, illuminating itself. As it is said in the engaging of the conduct for awakening, if no one has ever seen the mind, then it is meaningless to discuss whether it is luminous or not. It is like discussing if the beauty of a barren woman's daughter. Moreover, it is said to behold self-knowing wisdom. It is beyond the ways of speech, not an object of mind. Since there are no objects for it to know, no mind can exist. As has been explained above, external objects such as visible forms and so forth do not exist. Therefore, an internal mind which apprehends them also cannot exist. The showing the indivisible nature of its expansive phenomenon says, consider one by one whether the mind is blue, whether the mind is yellow, whether the mind is red, white, crimson, or color of a crystal. Is it pure or impure? Can it be called permanent or impermanent? Does it have a form or is it without form? The mind does not have any form, cannot be indicated, is invisible, is unobstructed, is imperceptible, and does not abide within, without, or in between the two. So it is completely pure and utterly without inherent existence. It does not need to be liberated because it is the nature of expansive phenomenon. Also, engaging in the conduct for awakening says, if there is nothing to know, then who knows? How can we speak about knowing? And since there is no object of knowledge present, there could be no knower either. Thus we have shown the internal apprehending mind to lack an inherent existence. In this way, the apprehension of phenomenon as things Bawa, has been presented. Now, secondly, we are to prevent their apprehensions of non-things, Bawa. If those two identities cannot be attested anywhere as anything whatsoever, then the question arises whether they are nothing at all. However, they cannot be attested as non-things. Why not? If these two identities have been seen in the first place, then becomes non-existence. Then they become called non-things. But since there's never this inherently existent phenomenon called two identities, they are beyond the extremes of something and nothing. As Saraha said, apprehending things, people act just like cattle. Apprehending nothing, they are even more stupid. Also, the descent into Lanka says, the external world is neither something nor nothing. The mind is also unapprehendable, complete abandonment of all conceptual views. That is the characteristics of the unborn, nipita, nibbana, nirvana. And this is the precious, Garland says. When no something has been found, then how can we find nothing? This could be cited from the Jewel Ornament of Liberation, page 278 to 284. This ends chapter 9 from the perspective of the Vajrayana tradition. As we move on to chapter 10, the goal Buddhism from the Theravada tradition. A brief reading from the common Buddhist text, Guidance and Insight from the Buddha. Chief editor of this compilation is Dr. Maha Dhammakosajan, other known as Brahma Pandit.